In 2011, Bethesda released The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, and now in 2025, Obsidian has released Avowed, but how do these games differ when it comes to attention to detail? So guys, welcome to my direct comparison of the brand new Avowed versus the legendary Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, and I hope you guys enjoyed this direct comparison as much as I've enjoyed making it for you guys, and I know it's been a little bit since I've made one of these direct comparison videos. I've been working on more long-form critiques of the older Call of Duty campaigns, so if you're a fan of the campaigns of World at War or the original Black Ops, check out those critiques that are up on my channel. I poured my heart into those, and they've kind of been interfering with my weekly upload schedule because those videos just take so long to make. But either way, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this direct comparison of Avowed versus Skyrim. But guys, let's dive into the video. Beginning with a comparison of the worlds themselves, in Avowed, the world is much more static than what we see in Skyrim. You won't be coming across wild giants as they roam the landscape or lone hunters as they independently hunt wild game. As a matter of fact, like 90% of the creatures you'll come across are hostile and will only interact with you once you enter their proximity. This in turn makes the world of Avowed feel a bit less malleable than what we see with the sandbox of Skyrim, which has a living and breathing ecosystem. And speaking of wildlife, in Avowed, if you happen to come across some non-aggressive animals, you can't interact with them at all or even harvest them for materials. While obviously this isn't the case in Skyrim, as every creature in the game has a benefit to being harvested, even if it's just for food ingredients. What's also interesting is that in Avowed, you can't really interact with most of the NPCs you come across. As you can see, whenever I hit this guard, he doesn't react at all. Whereas in Skyrim, obviously if I hit a guard, we'll engage in combat, and I can then interact with the game's criminal and jail system.
What are you doing? You have committed crimes against Skyrim and her people. What say you in your defense?
Showing that the sandbox world of Skyrim is more malleable by direct player action, whereas Avowed is shaped by the decisions you make during quests. And moving on now to a brief side-by-side of the combat between the two games, and in Skyrim we've always heard the critique that it doesn't really feel like your melee weapons are making contact with the enemies in the game, whereas in Avowed you don't really have that issue, as the combat does feel pretty kinetic, like you're actually making contact with the enemies when you're hitting them. Though I do gotta say, in Avowed, the combat kind of feels floaty, as the killing blow that you get on the enemies kind of makes them feel weightless, as they're always sent flying through the air, whereas in Skyrim it actually feels a bit more grounded and weighty. Not to mention the slow motion finishing animations can be sick as hell. And with both of these games being open world fantasy games, you do have a bit of overlap with some of the creatures, which is fun to see. Like for example, spiders are in both games, and in Avowed, whenever you fight spiders and you actually kill them, they actually roll over and shrivel up like an actual dead spider, which is kind of cool. While in Skyrim, the frostbite spiders don't do this, but they are definitely worse when it comes to my arachnophobia. Even skeletal warriors appear in both games, and I do kind of like in Avowed that the skeletons tend to wear more clothing, which is kind of cool. But in Skyrim, it's always going to be awesome seeing that killing blow just explode the skeletons to pieces. The games also have a few differences when it comes to dialogue, as in Avowed, anytime you go to speak with an NPC, the camera will cut and show cross coverage of whoever's speaking in the conversation. Meanwhile, in Skyrim, anytime you go to have a conversation with an NPC, the POV is never broken away from the player character, which makes it feel like you're having a conversation in the world instead of the world being focused around your conversation. And moving on now to a comparison of the fire magic effects between the two games, and in Avowed, whenever you cast a fire spell, it looks fantastic. I love all the little details of your character actually casting the spell, and whenever you burn the ground, you actually do leave a small burn effect on the ground, though it looks kind of strange and it disappears pretty quickly. While in Skyrim, whenever you're casting a fire spell, it doesn't necessarily look bad, though it doesn't look nearly as impressive as the much newer Avowed, though I will say whenever the fire spell is making contact with the ground, the burn and charred marks left on the ground are much more impressive looking, and they stick around for much longer. And speaking of fire, I always find it interesting in modern games whenever you have a fire in a dark environment and it doesn't cast any light or shadows whatsoever. Though this isn't just an issue in newer games, as you can see in Skyrim, this is something that also happens as well. Another interesting comparison is that, as you know, in Skyrim you can actually see your weapons on your character even if they're not equipped in your hand, though this isn't the case whenever you're equipping a staff, as anytime you try to put the staff away, it just disappears and vanishes off your character. Whereas in Avowed, not only can you see the wand or staff you have equipped on your character, but you can also see the spellbook that you have equipped on you, which is pretty cool. Another thing I found interesting goes back to that comment I made earlier about the world of Avowed feeling kind of static, as whenever I walk up to this vendor and I go to hit the things on his table, I can't interact with them at all in Avowed. Whereas in Skyrim, whenever I tried this, the objects in the environment aren't nailed down like they are in Avowed, and I can actually knock them around the environment, in turn making the world feel more grounded and realistic. Another small detail I noticed is that in Avowed, if you come across food in the environment, you can actually eat the food straight out of the environment, whereas in Skyrim, if you come across food in the environment, you have to first pick it up, put it into your inventory, and then you can eat it out of your inventory, which is different than what we saw in Avowed. And moving on now to a comparison of the archery between the two games, and the first thing I noticed in Avowed is that whenever you're shooting a bow, you actually have unlimited arrows, which is not the case in Skyrim. But if you shoot an arrow into the environment, you can see that arrow in the environment in Avowed, though it disappears pretty quickly. Whereas in Skyrim, obviously you don't have infinite arrows, but the arrows you do shoot into the environment, they don't disappear, and you can actually recover these arrows from the environment. Not to mention in Avowed, if you shoot an arrow straight up, it just flies up into the stratosphere, whereas in Skyrim, if you shoot an arrow straight up, eventually it will fall back down to the ground. Another small detail you'll notice in Avowed is whenever you go to drink a potion, you actually see an animation of your character drinking the potion in first person, which is pretty cool. Whereas in Skyrim, whenever you drink a potion, you drink it straight out of your inventory, and I kind of hope we see an animation like we did in Avowed moving forward in Elder Scrolls 6. Which leads us to a comparison of the water effects, and I find it interesting in a modern open world game like Avowed that the water, when you interact with it, doesn't react to you at all. There's no ripple effects, there's no splashing, there's nothing, whereas in a game like Skyrim that came out in 2011 has pretty gorgeous looking water effects, and I wonder if they just didn't think it was worth their time, but it's kind of weird when you notice it. Another interesting difference between these two games is that in Avowed, if you're walking in third person, you can see a pretty highly detailed shadow that your character is casting, and if you switch to first person, you can still see that shadow. While in Skyrim, if you're traveling in third person, you can see the shadow that your character is casting, but if you switch to first person, your shadow actually disappears, which is something I've always found interesting. And to close out this video, we're going to do a comparison of the fall damage between the two games, and as you can see in Avowed, whenever you jump off a cliff, you just kind of splat and die. Whereas in the lovely world of Skyrim, whenever you jump to your death, your character always does this funny, awkward, spinning dance move. I don't know, I always kind of thought it was funny. Well guys, thank you for watching to the end of the video. This has been my direct comparison of Avowed versus the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this direct comparison as much as I enjoyed making it for you guys. So be sure to let me know down in the comments what you thought of this comparison. What did I leave out and what comparisons do you want to see in the future? But guys, I really enjoyed making this video and I hope you guys enjoyed watching it. But guys, that's all I have for this video and I'll catch you guys on the next one. See you.